His story demonstrated that those who pursue their education with commitment can succeed and achieve their goals. That legacy has continued to inspire generations of talented students at the Eastman School of Music through the William Warfield Scholarship Fund. Here to tell us more is Thomas Warfield, Director of Dance at RIT's National Technical Institute for the Deaf, also the nephew of the legendary William Warfield. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Thomas, who was William Warfield?
Well, he was my Uncle Bill, firstly. But you know, he was a person who opened doors for generations after him, carved a pathway for African Americans specifically in classical music. At a time when there were very, very few. Roland Hayes, Marian Anderson, Paul Robeson, really, that was kind of almost it. And when he came along. And so his journey and his career really were trailblazing in a sense, and created a space where it was then possible for so many others to follow. And that's in a sense also what the scholarship does. It continues that legacy of giving opportunity and supporting that opportunity. It's not only that there's a giving of a financial support, but there's also kind of a moral support in a sense for the student, that they know that they belong to this sort of family almost of the Warfield board, and I think that's really important. And
so family moved here from Arkansas to Rochester. He's a product of the Rochester City School District. He could have chose any school that that he wanted to go to, but chose the Eastman School, chose to stay in Rochester. Why was that?
Well, that's a wonderful story. So when he was in high school, Washington High School, which is no longer here, but he won a citywide competition, vocal competition. And then he went on to the state and won the state competition. The national competition was in St. Louis, and he did not have the funds, his family did not have the funds to send him to St. Louis, but his classmates raised the money to send him to St. Louis. And he then won the national competition of this vocal competition, and the award was a full scholarship to any university in the United States. And he chose, of course, the Eastman School of Music, which is the prominent music school in the United States, in the world. And there he did both his undergraduate work, and then went off to the Army during World War II, and came back and did his master's there as well.
Such an interesting and rich career. Traveled the world. What are some of the highlights of his career? Well,
I think most people know Uncle Bill for singing Old Man River in the film Showboat, 1951 MGM musical. And there's a funny story interesting story about that. When they made the recording on the sound stage with the orchestra and everything for the film, they did it in one take, which in that day was really unheard of. Well, this day too, actually. It was unheard of. And as the story goes, after he finished singing, and the orchestra finished playing, there was this silence for a few moments, and then everybody erupted into applause, the orchestra and everybody, and they called Mr. Mayer down because they wanted to tell him this happened in one take, you saved money. But mostly they wanted him to hear this extraordinary performance, and so they played it back. And as the story goes, Mr. Mayer was quite a kind of dry-eyed person, I guess I could say, but he was his tears were running down his eyes after he listened to it, and so he was a great supporter of my uncle's career. Other highlights, though, he well, in the musical theater arena, also there's the Porgy and Bess, and in 1952. The State Department actually used to have they may still have this, but they have a cultural ambassadors that they send out around the world to other countries, performers, singers, dancers. And actually to this day, William Warfield is the American artist that has gone out the most for the United States State Department. But anyway, they put together this Porgy and Bess production that was eventually coming to Broadway, but first toured the world. And they they were looking for a Bess. And my uncle's manager, they hired him as Porgy, and then my uncle's manager heard a student at Juilliard, and said, I think you got to listen to this young woman. She's just extraordinary. And they went and listened to her, and it was Leontine Price, who of course was a student at the time. And my uncle said, that's Bess. And not only was that Bess, but during this world tour, the two of them got married.
Right.
And so that's probably a big highlight of his life. But you know, he was his world really was classical music, and he was an extraordinary interpreter of the German Lieder song. Even to this day, students studying will study his recordings of those Lieder songs and oratorios and the way his interpretation. So I think his highlight really is that he's passed on an excellence, in a sense, of musicianship and artistry to the next generations, to many generations, actually. Yeah.
And so 40 years ago, congratulations on the anniversary, the William Warfield Scholarship Fund was set up. How did that come about?
Well, that's a long story that I won't go into, but part of the story is it was created by Tessa Martin, who was here in Rochester, New York, but was from Athens, Greece. And in the 50s, she went to a concert of William Warfield and Leontine Price in Athens, Greece. And she was mesmerized, particularly the Negro spiritual, or as we call now, African American spirituals, which she had never heard. And it moved her so much that she never forgot it.
Wow.
And when she married and moved to the United States, and her husband was here in Webster, New York, and her son was going to Harley School at the time, and I was going to Harley School at the time, in first grade, and he and I became friends. And one day she said to my mother, you know, I heard of a Warfield years ago, a singer named William. Are you any relation? She says, well, my mother said, that's my brother-in-law. And that's kind of how the relationship began. And she eventually thought we need to create a scholarship in his name. Right. And that's how it happened.
That's so wonderful. How does the scholarship support the student exactly?
Well, the scholarship supplements the students' tuition and also provides opportunities for the student to perform. Sure. We have two main events every year. In the January at Kilburn Hall, we do a concert to raise money for the scholarship, and then coming up, of course, on April 26th is the luncheon where the student will also perform. That's so wonderful. And who will we hear at the scholarship luncheon? Alicia Rosser, who is the student this year, and she's a senior now at Eastman and getting ready to fly away into her amazing career, which I'm sure she'll have. We've been delighted to be part of her time here at Eastman, and you know, it's interesting. Well, over 40 years, there's been a lot of students, and but they've all pretty much kept in touch with us over the years, letting us know how they are. Many have become pretty accomplished on their own, and it's always a joy for us to know that we were somewhat part of it. Sounds like a family at work. So. It is. And you know, the board is like this family as well. It feels like we're all kind of going for the same goal, to help the student pursue their dreams, to fulfill their passions, and be as helpful as we can. Absolutely. How could the community support the Scholarship Foundation? Well, of course, the community can always donate to the Scholarship Fund, the WilliamWarfield.org. And you can come to the luncheon. That's a wonderful way to do it. And you can get tickets at 2017 William Warfield Luncheon.eventbrite.com. I think that's right. I should be reading it probably. And you can get that link through the main website. And you can get that link through the main website, Okay. So, you know, another thing I think, though, is that the community, it's not just about the money, though. Sure. I think it's also about, you know, sort of the legacy of William Warfield and how out of this community rose this prominent, accomplished person, which could really happen to any child in this community if the community supports them, nurtures them, cultivates them along the way. And I think that's also how the community could help. Yeah.
Such an inspirational story. What are your future goals for the William Warfield Scholarship Foundation? Where would you like to see this go?
Well, I think we just would like to continue, one, increasing our endowment and ability to help a student and perhaps more students at the same time, multiple students. I think continuing to lay out and express and encourage and grow the legacy of William Warfield and how that story is important in not just his life and our lives and the students' life, but really in all lives in this community, and maybe use it as an example.
Absolutely. Final question, why is this so important for Rochester?
You know, I think he's important for Rochester because he grew up here. He's a product of this environment. You know, when he was growing up and when I was growing up, the music in school, the arts in the school was a hugely important part of education. And we have to continue doing that. And so I think by continuing his legacy and telling his story, we help to support that idea and to make sure that that really is continuing for the William Warfields we have yet to discover. You know, when he was, I was going to just mention this, when he was a little boy, he was a newspaper boy for the Frederick Douglass Voice.
Amazing.
This was in 1934, and he has this little certificate that they put out. And that time, Howard Coles was running that newspaper. But that's a wonderful piece of history.
So many wonderful stories. Thank you so much for coming on today,
you're
Thomas.
so welcome.
If you'd like more information about the William Warfield Scholarship Fund 40th Anniversary Luncheon, Wednesday, April 26th, visit williamwarfield.org. You can also send an email to info@williamwarfield.org.